Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and this is a guide for the latest addition to Dota Underlords, the Contraption items. They give you the ability to impact the landscape of the battlefield with some interesting effects. Let's cover the basics of the strategy and positioning for each of the new contraptions. First up, Barricade, which is a tier 2 item which places 2 barricades on the board. These are relatively weak with just 400 health. They do have quite a bit of armor, 20 armor, and are immune to spells. They block opponents' ranged attacks until they break. So essentially, if an opponent is trying to ranged attack somebody behind the barricade, it will block that attack, and instead that ranged attack will hit the barricade, and it'll have the 20 armor and the 400 health until it breaks. These barricades are very versatile. They can cover your flanks, protect against assassins. They control the movement of melee units because no units can move through them, so they effectively block off that square. So here's some of the best ways to use them. In this example, it's a great way to counter opposing melee lineups. By camping all of our hunters in the corner here, you force opposing melee units to kind of line up and kind of funnel directly into this side here. The barricades can even save some damage against a ranged lineup who will have to attack through the barricades in order to get to your hunters in the back, and then the barricades will absorb some of that damage. Another use is to protect your flanks, and this is a very effective lineup here. I was playing the Knights on the bottom side against my opponent playing this Terrorblade warrior composition, and essentially the way the fight would play out is all of their units would try to kind of loop down here on the left and try to get into the side where I have the weaker Necrophos and Witch Doctor, as opposed to my more beefy frontliners, the Abaddon, Omni Knight, and Chaos Knight. So essentially we funnel them into our resilient frontliners while protecting our most vulnerable units. This was particularly effective, and I was able to easily win this matchup every time. We can also use them to block off opposing melee units. So this was an example I set up against bots, so obviously the builds are not ideal. And if you have if the opponent is lined up in a straight line like this, with melee units, pretend Techies is a melee unit for a moment, and you place 2 barricades in front of them, essentially in order for this Juggernaut here on the far right-hand side to get into melee combat, he's going to have to walk all the way around back just to get into combat with the Slardar over here. And similarly, if this was a melee unit where the Techies is, same deal. They've got to walk all the way behind the formation. That delays them for a good 2 or 3 or 4 seconds until they can get into combat and start attacking. Meanwhile, your entire board gets to attack right off the bat. You do have to be careful not to place a unit in the diagonal spot right here, right next to your barricades, such as if Kunkka was moved over 1 step, then a melee unit could attack diagonally across these barricades, but they cannot move through them and they cannot destroy them. So that's another use if your opponent is in a very specific kind of front-facing organization like this. Next up is kind of a gimmicky usage, I'll say, that's only applicable to Arc Warden. If you place Arc Warden back in a corner and you place the 2 barricades directly on the side of it, you essentially limit the targeting or the spot where Arc Warden can summon his clone. Typically, Arc Warden will prefer to summon a clone directly to his left. However, if that is occupied, he'll try to do it in a counterclockwise motion, and so by placing them like this, we force the clone to spawn directly in front, which is ideal, because if an opponent's melee unit is coming up to attack Arc Warden, they'll kill the clone first, at which point Arc Warden will create a new clone instantly. Thus, you can get many more clones. However, this is very risky, because if an opponent has an Assassin or a Blink Dagger and they lock onto the Arc Warden, they will immediately jump into this spot before Arc Warden can create a clone. Essentially, the Assassin or the Blink Dagger claims that spot instantly, and Arc Warden says, well, that spot's occupied and can't make a copy. So do be careful of using this strategy against Assassins or Blink Daggers, as it can backfire very hard and your Arc Warden doesn't make any copies at all and then dies right away. Next item up is Target Buddy, and this is one of my personal favorites. Target Buddy creates a replica of Tidehunter who has 1000 health and 10 armor, and he will taunt enemies right away. This is a 3-second taunt on a 10-second cooldown. In reality, you can kind of think of this more as like a 2-star axe. A 2-star axe base stats is 1,400 health and 5 armor, so they're roughly equivalent, and also has a taunt. However, this Target Buddy cannot attack, but he can equip items, and Aside from the obvious chainmail or other defensive items, you can also give him Blink Dagger, which leads to an interesting interaction. If he will cast his taunt first if there's somebody in range, and then he will blink to the backline. So if he taunts somebody and then blinks, they'll try to chase after him and run backwards. But for the most part, that's kind of a waste of the Blink Dagger because you want to be using it on a unit who can utilize the mana gain. Let's look at some examples of how to properly position him. So here's one example where Target Buddy essentially plays an extra frontliner. He can hold some of the enemies in place while your CC units like Tidehunter and Kunkka can get up and get their casts off. This is similar to how you'd position the Target Buddy in the early game. You would generally just run him up front and then have all of your units in the back because you really want to utilize that tankiness aspect of him. He does not move like a regular tank would, so you basically need to force your opponents to walk into his range in order to taunt. Another usage is to kind of protect your flanks or protect against assassins, similar to the way Barricade works. And by placing him here, we place him closer to the back. We're essentially saying any opponents who are going to come to our side and try to flank, try to hit this Venomancer or this Lone Druid who are a bit more vulnerable, they're going to have to get through the Target Buddy first. So Lycan will obviously move out as he's melee, and if an assassin jumps in here to try to hop on Venomancer, they'll get immediately taunted up. And then all of our ranged units here can turn and kill the assassin before the assassin can really kill off anybody. The next item up is Healing Ward. And this one is a tier 3 item that has 200 health and 0 armor, and it heals adjacent allies for 20 health per second, just in the immediate radius right next to it. And I really like the idea of Healing Ward, the idea that you have this like area of healing that, you know, if you can stay stacked up in it, you're very strong. The actual execution is very bad because the numbers are just really low. The design is good, the balance is bad. The 1 cell radius is very restrictive, and very often your units just move outside of it because unlike things like Knight Synergy, they have no preference to kind of walk back to it if they're just, you know, 1 step out of range. And the healing itself is just very low. 20 health per second is very small compared to the health totals of most units in the mid game when you're getting these tier 3 items. If this was a tier 1 item, it would still honestly be kind of poor. Tier 1, you know, 1-star units have 700 health at the higher end or 500, so 20 health per second is really not all that substantial and does not scale well at all into the late game. That being said, if you do pick it up, there's a pretty much just one way to play it. You want to play it roughly in the middle of the board. If you place it too far off to the side of the board, then of course you'll cut off some of its area of effect. And also, if you're too far off to one side, say you're stacked on the right corner, then if your opponent's stacked on the other side, your units will have to immediately move out and get out of the radius. So if ideally you're roughly centrally located so that no matter where your opponents are at, your units aren't going to move too far, and hopefully they don't move at all so that you can stay in the radius. But I would avoid playing this until they buff it at some point. I'm sure the developers will see its low win rate and they'll have to do something to either increase its healing or increase its range or something along those lines. Next up, Tombstone. Now this is a very strong tier 4 item. It has 2,000 health and 20 armor, so twice as resilient as the Target Buddy. And whenever any hero dies within a 2 square radius, you'll summon a zombie. And these zombies do scale with the star level of the hero killed. So if you kill a 1-star unit, you get a 1-star zombie. And then those zombies scale up if you kill 3-star units as well. These zombies are affected by Summoning Stone. So if you have Summoning Stone and you're kind of in this summons build, you really want to prioritize Tombstone. The positioning for it is pretty straightforward. You want to place it in the 2nd rank here. You can see this gray ground indicating the radius of its effect. And so if you place it here in the 2nd rank, you don't get any of it cut off. If you place it, you know, back in the 3rd row here, you will, I say 2nd rank from the front. If you place it in the 3rd row from the front, some of its radius will be cut off on the back. And if you place it too close to the edge, it'll be cut off on the right or on the left. So this is kind of an optimal placement. You want to play some frontliners in front of it who can kind of tank up for it, because while it does have quite a bit of life, and you can use it as a tank, as we'll talk about that in a second, Its big effect is if it can stay alive and then all of your units die inside of it, and then you get zombies and can go crazy. This one also has a target buddy in the back for more example of how you can use target buddy to protect your backline. In this kind of case, I knew that many of our opponents had assassins or blink daggers, so this target buddy was in a great spot, and so was the starter to pick up anybody who is going to jump onto our backline. The other way is you can use it as a frontline tank, and specifically in builds that kind of lack frontliners, like say this Primordials build. They really only have like Tiny and some of the assassins, which aren't even dedicated frontliners, they just work in the front. You can use Tombstone up front to kind of distract the opponents, although I generally don't recommend this because Tombstone has such a powerful effect if it stays alive for a while, although it is quite resilient and can take quite a number of hits. Specifically, it's good if your opponent is running something like Tidehunter or Kunkka or like some other big CC unit, and you can scout out where they're going to place it. You can put the Tombstone directly in front of it so you can kind of tank it up without attacking them back and giving them mana for being attacked, and thus you get to delay their ability and their CC for longer. However, if that's not the case, you'll probably want to position more like this, where it's off to the side, kind of in the second rank, and protected so that we can get a lot of value out of it by having most of our units inside of its radius here. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this and learned a little bit more about the contraptions. I really love them. I love the design space that all of these open up for future items. Please let me know what your favorite contraption is down in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're interested, a written form of this guide is in my article up on QAHL.gg. Link is in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.